There are players in professional hockey who are remembered for their skill, their hands, their skating, the goals they scored in moments that mattered. And then there are players who are remembered for something harder to define, a presence, an energy, a willingness to do things on the ice that most people would not do, and that nobody who played against them ever fully forgot. Claude Lemieux belongs to the second category, and depending on who you ask, that is either a compliment or an indictment. He was born on July 16, 1965 in Buckingham, Quebec, a small town about an hour outside of Ottawa that produced exactly the kind of hockey player you would expect a small Canadian town to produce. Tough, determined, not the most gifted skater in the room, but absolutely the last person willing to leave it. Quebec in the 1960s and 1970s was a place where hockey was not a hobby or a pastime. It was a language. It was how communities understood themselves. Boys grew up on frozen ponds and outdoor rinks, learning that the game demanded everything from you and that you gave it willingly because that was simply what you did. Claude was not the kind of prospect that scouts circle in red and call their bosses about at midnight. He did not have the natural elegance that separates the truly gifted from everyone else. What he had was something that is genuinely harder to find and significantly harder to coach, an absolute refusal to be pushed around, an instinct for the game's most important moments, and a competitive mentality so intense that it occasionally crossed lines that other players would not go near. Whether that mentality was a gift or a flaw depended entirely on which locker room you were sitting in. The Montreal Canadiens drafted him in 1983. There are few organizations in professional sports with the weight and history of the Canadiens. The banners hanging from the rafters at the Forum represented decades of dominance and a standard that new players were expected to understand the moment they walked through the door. For a young kid from Buckingham, Quebec, putting on that jersey for the first time carried a significance that went well beyond hockey. It was an arrival, a declaration that whatever he had been doing in the junior leagues had been enough to earn him a seat at the most prestigious table in the sport. His early years in Montreal were exactly what you would expect from a player still learning how to survive at the professional level. He was raw in some areas and already fully formed in others. The rawness was technical. The formation was competitive. He understood instinctively how to get under an opponent's skin, how to use the physical game to his advantage, how to make himself the most irritating presence on the ice at any given moment. Coaches appreciated it even when they could not always defend it publicly. Teammates understood it even when they occasionally winced at where it led. Then came 1986. Claude Lemieux was 20 years old, and the Montreal Canadiens were making a run at the Stanley Cup. What followed was one of the more remarkable moments in the long history of a franchise built on remarkable moments. The Canadiens won the Cup, and Claude was a part of it. A 20-year-old kid from a small Quebec town standing in the middle of a championship celebration that the entire country was watching. In professional sports, early success can do one of two things to a young player. It can make them complacent, as if the destination has been reached and the urgency can fade, or it can show them what is possible and create a hunger that never fully goes away. For Claude Lemieux, it did the second thing. What followed across the next decade was a career that defied easy categorization. He played for the Montreal Canadiens, the New Jersey Devils, the Colorado Avalanche, the Phoenix Coyotes, the Dallas Stars, and the San Jose Sharks. The movement from team to team tells its own story about who he was as a player and as a person. He was not the kind of athlete that organizations built around quietly and kept hidden. He was the kind that made things happen. Sometimes things his own coaches were not entirely comfortable with, but things that had a way of mattering when the games that mattered most arrived. The New Jersey Devils years brought another Stanley Cup. By this point, Claude had established himself as something specific and rare in professional hockey, a player who elevated in the playoffs in a way that did not happen for most players at the professional level. Regular seasons are long and grinding and require a certain kind of consistency that Claude possessed without necessarily dominating the statistical categories that casual observers pay attention to. But the playoffs brought something out of him that was different. The intensity, the physicality, the emotional engagement with every shift. It all compressed into something that made him genuinely dangerous in a way that opposing coaches had to account for in their preparation. The Colorado Avalanche years are where Claude Lemieux's career reached its most complicated and most memorable chapter simultaneously. The Avalanche of the mid to late 1990s were one of the best teams in professional hockey, built around elite skill at the top of the lineup and a supporting cast that understood how to win in conditions that were not always pretty. Claude fit into that structure perfectly. He was not the reason people bought tickets to watch Colorado. He was the reason the people who bought tickets to watch Colorado came home with something to talk about. And then there was the night of May 29, 1996. The Colorado Avalanche and the Detroit Red Wings were playing in the Western Conference Finals. The rivalry between those two franchises had been building for a period of time, and it was about to reach the kind of moment that defines rivalries permanently. Claude Lemieux hit Chris Draper from behind near the boards. Draper's face went into the boards. He suffered a broken nose, a broken jaw, a broken cheekbone, and a concussion. The hit was late. It was from behind, and it was ugly in a way that even the most ardent supporters of physical hockey had difficulty defending. The NHL suspended Claude for 2 games. Detroit felt the punishment was inadequate by a significant margin, and they were not wrong to feel that way. What that hit created, however, went beyond the incident itself. It ignited a rivalry between Colorado and Detroit that became one of the most emotionally charged and physically intense in the history of the sport. Games between those two teams over the following years were events that players on both sides prepared for differently than they prepared for other games. The stakes were always higher. The tension was always tighter. The possibility of something erupting was always present. Darren McCarty of the Detroit Red Wings waited almost a full year. Then on March 26, 1997, in a game between Colorado and Detroit, he found Claude Lemieux and delivered a beating that the entire hockey world watched, and that settled, at least in Detroit's estimation, the debt that had been accumulating since Chris Draper's face went into the boards. The fight set off a massive brawl that involved nearly every player on both sides. Patrick Roy, Colorado's goaltender, skated the length of the ice to engage Detroit's goaltender, Mike Vernon. The game essentially ceased to be a game for a period of time and became something more primal and more personal. Hockey people look back on that stretch of Colorado versus Detroit games as one of the purest expressions of what playoff hockey can mean when the stakes are high enough and the history between teams is deep enough. Claude Lemieux was at the center of all of it, not always as the most sympathetic figure, but always as a genuinely significant one. 4 Stanley Cups. That is the number that sits at the top of Claude Lemieux's hockey biography, and that separates him from the vast majority of players who ever put on an NHL uniform. Montreal in 1986, New Jersey in 1995, Colorado in 1996, New Jersey again in 2000. Across 15 seasons and 6 different organizations, he managed to find himself in the right place at the right time, often enough that it stopped being luck and started being something else. Something closer to an instinct for how championship hockey is played and what it demands from the people who want to be a part of it. He won the Conn Smythe Trophy in 1995 as the most valuable player in the playoffs, the highest individual honor available in the postseason, and one that confirmed in an official way what people who watched him closely already understood. When the games mattered most, Claude Lemieux was not diminished by the pressure. He was enlarged by it. The physical cost of a career built on that kind of engagement with the game is not a small thing. Professional hockey breaks bodies in ways that accumulate slowly and then arrive all at once. The hits absorbed and delivered across 15 seasons of playing at the edge of what the rules permitted, and occasionally beyond it, take something from a person that does not come back when the career ends. Claude dealt with injuries throughout his time in the league and continued competing through circumstances that would have ended the careers of players with less tolerance for pain and less motivation to keep going. Away from the ice, Claude Lemieux built a life that existed in a different register entirely from the one he inhabited during games. He married Deborah, and together they raised a family that became its own hockey story in time. His son Brendan Lemieux followed his father into professional hockey and developed his own reputation for physical play and competitive intensity, qualities that were clearly not accidental given who raised him and what he grew up watching. Seeing your child reach the same level you reached in the same profession is not something every athlete gets to experience, and the pride that Claude has spoken about when discussing Brendan's career reads as entirely genuine. The financial rewards of a career that long and that successful were substantial. The NHL of the 1990s was not the billion-dollar enterprise it has become in the years since, but players of Claude's tenure and production earned significant money and the stability that came with it. Beyond the contracts, there were endorsements, appearances, and the ongoing currency of a name that hockey people recognize immediately and respond to with strong feelings in either direction. In retirement, Claude has maintained a connection to the sport through appearances, engagement with the hockey community, and a public presence that keeps him relevant in conversations about the game's history. The death rumors that have circulated online over the years, the kind that attach themselves to retired athletes who have stepped back from the daily visibility of active competition, are entirely false. Claude Lemieux is alive and continues to be a part of the hockey world in the ways available to someone who gave the sport everything he had for the better part of 2 decades. What makes Claude Lemieux genuinely interesting as a subject is the complexity. He is not a simple story. He is not the villain that opposing fans wanted him to be, and he is not the saint that his own supporters occasionally tried to make him. He is something more honest and more complicated than either of those things. A man who found in professional hockey the perfect arena for qualities that the sport both rewards and struggles to contain, and who used those qualities to win 4 championships across a career that nobody who watched professional hockey during his era is going to forget. The players who provoke the strongest reactions are rarely the ones who play it safe. They are the ones who commit fully to who they are on the ice, consequences and all, and who make you feel something even when what you feel is not entirely comfortable. Claude Lemieux spent 15 seasons making people feel things. His opponents felt frustration and rage and occasionally physical pain. His teammates felt gratitude and confidence, and the particular kind of security that comes from knowing the person beside you in a tight game will not fold. His coaches felt the specific tension of managing someone whose value and whose volatility are inseparable from each other. Hockey gave Claude Lemieux everything: the championships, the recognition, the financial security, the identity. And Claude Lemieux gave hockey back something that the sport needed and still needs: the proof that greatness does not always look the way we expect it to, that toughness and determination and the willingness to be disliked in the service of winning are legitimate forms of excellence, and that the players who define eras are not always the ones who made it look easy. He made it look hard because it was hard, and he did it anyway, 4 times.